My mission is to teach history through art and to make people think more critically about false narratives. I'm Jim McMurtry, and welcome to my classroom. The painting, or rather paintings, that we're going to look at today were done by a man named George Southwell in the mid 1930s. There's four of them. And the reason that they might mean something to people is that they caused a contretemps. They caused a big social furor in the early part of this new century, and were not removed as the media first reported, but because the art was done on plaster, that they were covered. So these four great paintings and murals that were found in the Rotunda of the British Columbia Legislative Assembly can no longer be seen. And so that's really what I'd like to talk about today, and in particular focus on why that is. And of the four, there's one that I'd like to focus on, and they have themes that each painting. One was justice, one was enterprise, one was labor, and one was courage. The one I'd like to focus on is labor, because it really is the center of the controversy, and you can imagine why, because you're seeing four bare-breasted women, and some tourists, and certainly this their media reported in 2007, that some tourists, when they came into the BC legislature, they found it discomforting to see this, and apparently some people complained. I don't know how many people complained. That's not something that was ever talked about, but it was people with, I guess, Victorian sensibilities. We have a thing, and particularly in North America, about nudity that others don't have, but that, of course, is part of it. Was there in Europe as well. When I was in Switzerland, people would change out of their bathing suits into their bathing suits in front of everybody else at the beach. So there are some societies now in Western Europe that are very liberal, but maybe we remain in North America a little less liberal, and of course much more liberal though than societies elsewhere in the world. So maybe part of what caused these paintings to be taken down, particularly the one called Labor with the four bare-breasted women, was that maybe that wasn't the place for nudity. Another thing that was said, it was the fact that the women were being looked upon as slaves. I'd like to talk about that. And the first comment I want to say is, at the time, in April 2007, there were people who said that this wasn't good art or good history. Now, I think it's good art, but again, art is, as Margaret Atwood, our famous author, said, what is art to one man is another man's or woman's dog's breakfast. So it's a very subjective thing. As far as being good history, I think it is good history. I think if you look at the ship in the background, if you look at the articles that are being traded, the clothing, and so much else in the painting, I think it's very accurate. If you the fish, what were the Aboriginal people, Indigenous people along the southwest coast of British Columbia, that was the number one thing that the Europeans wanted for them was fish, and they sold the fish as far west as Hawaii and down the American coast and so forth. So it was a great trading item for the British. Now, of course, furs, and earlier in Canadian history, it was the fur trade that really caused the industrial development of Canada and the settlement right across the country. It was chasing after that little rodent that we now call a beaver, and so yes, it was fish and furs, and there was both, but it was mostly fish in the southwest, part of BC, because of abundance of fish, particularly going up the Fraser River. So I think it is, for myself, good art. I also think for myself it's good history. But there's something that's very wrong about the painting. But it's true of all paintings that were done back in time, and probably true of a lot of paintings done today, or any other um, film or inscription of what life is like today. There can be things that people are going to object to or think is false or whatever. And that is that women did not work doing that sort of labor. Women certainly worked hard. That was true in hunter and gathering societies, that they foraged, that they did a lot of the domestic work, and that's well known to people. But they didn't get involved in the trading. Now, of course, there'd be roles for women, particularly women who were particularly dynamic or intelligent or powerful or charismatic, whatever, and serving as diplomats and serving as interpreters and serving as guides and serving in lots of roles. So there are many remarkable Indigenous women in Canadian history, but they didn't get involved in trading fish and furs for kettles and knives, things that the Europeans brought, particularly metal pots and axes and saws and nails and things that were absolutely pots, probably the most important of all. Imagine cooking a meal before metal was brought, work metal, wrought metal was brought to the Indigenous people. How difficult it would be to cook meals in the intestine of a deer in comparison. So there's certainly the Europeans had lots of things that the Indigenous people had, and the Indigenous people had items that the Europeans were very happy to have. And early on, particularly when Fort Langley was established in 1827, essential for the survival of people of the fort to get the food because they just weren't able to produce enough for themselves in the early years before farming became established. So coming back to the idea of what is it that's a problem with these paintings, and again, I could say to you, it's the nudity or partial nudity, it's the objectification or the degradation or the demeaning representation of the Indigenous women in the in this commerce. But I don't think it's that. I think it's in every society, people produce art or people have produced art that it's upsetting to people, and the instinct is to destroy it, to cover it, or as one pope did in the Sistine Chapel in Rome, going around knocking off the male bits of and beautiful sculptures because it was offensive. So whether it's part of the human body or in Bamiyan in 2001, which is part of Afghanistan, it's where there were two beautiful Buddhist sculptures made into rocks that had been around for millennia. And what happens? The Taliban take office, obviously violently, and they decide one day to blow them up because they don't want their culture, which was Islamic, to look as though it wasn't the culture that had always been in Afghanistan. But before Islamic invaders came in, as early as the 7th century, it was a Buddhist area, and then were other religions like Zoroastrianism, and so to me it's really awful when we stamp out our history. So this is a statement that I would like to make. I think those paintings do, in many ways, give a good indication to people, particularly tourists, going into our legislative assembly, of what early British Columbian or Canadian society looked like, pioneer society. And again, it was meant to be positive, and that's why it was like courage, enterprise, justice, and labor were used, because it was the idea that there were good values, and this was a good society, and that Indigenous people and European people, or early Canadians, worked side by side in creating wealth in the society that we're lucky to live in today. And I think it's really very dangerous if we think that the people that are coming after us, the people in the future, are going to want to have us decide for them what art, what historical artifacts they can see or not see. I think that's particularly arrogant and insulting, that we are denying people after us from seeing the art that we ourselves have had a chance to see, and people before us have a chance to see. So any stamping out, any cancellation of art or of historical items, artifacts, sculptures, buildings, tools, whatever, any of these things, it's just has to be seen as wrong. And so, yeah, I think could extend this, of course, conversation into the area of literature, the area of literature, all sorts of books being banned in schools in Canada this time. We could talk about how speech is being reduced. So these are all part of a bigger picture, and I think it's not what we want. Canada is proudly, it's in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the country that's built on rights. And among those rights are the right to see and to know and to explore. So I'm hoping that maybe in a small way, this lesson will contribute to the uncovering of these four paintings, so people once again can judge for themselves history. Thank you.